Hi friends, it's Deanna Willison with Our Blooming Catholic Life, and I know I'm a little bit late today on our journey with Bilbo. I've gotten waylaid by a lot of things. How's your Lent going? Have you gotten waylaid by a lot of responsibilities? It can be hard. At the beginning, we have all these things that we're going to do, and we forget that we have our everyday responsibilities as well, and we have to work them in together. And I think that's through the process of Lent. You don't just want to cast them aside. You have to figure out, how do I integrate this spiritual growth, this path that I'm on, into my life? Or how do I integrate my life into this spiritual path? It's quite the question, and we're not alone in this. Our little hobbit friend has been doing quite the same thing, although allegorically. We're here today with chapter 7, The Return of the King. And in it, I'm starting on here on page 65. I want to remind you that back on page 59, so last time, they had been tempted to leave the path. Bilbo and the dwarves were tempted to leave the path, even though Christ had said, "Enter ye in the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there are who go thereat." And Gandalf had said, "Be good, take care of yourselves, and don't leave the path." They had, in fact, left the path. And so now they are prisoners. And Bilbo manages to get them out. He is free to them. And they make their getaway concealed in empty barrels, with the exception of Bilbo, who leaps into the water wearing the ring and travels downstream, floating on one of the barrels. The barrels are being floated down river to be collected and taken to Lake Town for reuse. As luck would have it, this method of escape is also the only practical method of reaching their destination. The little-known track they'd been following, that was no good path, it came to a doubtful and little-used end at the eastern edge of the forest. So even if Bilbo and the dwarves had managed to make their way through Mirkwood by that path, not the path, but by that little path they'd found, they would have found themselves lost in seemingly impassable marshes and bogs. So sometimes, friends, God saves us despite ourselves. And here they're in Lake Town, and whoa, Thorin and his company of dwarves are treated like kings by the common people. Their return was prophesied in legends that had become folklore. And as news spread of the legendary king's return, the people of Lake Town began to sing the old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain. And the singing of these songs reminds me of Hind's feet in high places. When little much afraid, whenever she is discouraged, she opens the old book of songs. She's singing psalms, friend. And there is great comfort in knowing hymns and psalms and scripture, passages of it that you can recite in times of trouble. We know that's a strength, both of Catholics and Protestants. Protestants can probably tell you exactly where in the Bible it is, and Catholics, not always. We know a lot of scripture, but we don't know always exactly where to find that. And part of that is because our translations that are approved for use in the Catholic Church, we have two different senses of naming things, which is a whole nother issue. We had a way of naming things following the Septuagint, but then to be more ecumenical with our Protestant brothers and sisters, we went and used the other system, and it's a hot mess. So it can be complicated to remember the citations. Anyway, this having these songs to remember your history and your people, as well as theology, has come into play in modern times. A lot of people had fallen in love with something called praise and worship music, right? And feel that very much lifts our hearts up to God, and we share in this big emotional experience with our friends at church. Here's the problem. Number one, most Christian musicians were not theologians. They weren't exceptional musicians to start with, but they could write some really good emotionally charged music. But they didn't have a theological background, and for whatever reason, pastors did not see fit to intervene or shepherd and guide a lot of these people. So the theology in the songs is a little bit off to start with. And if you've been following modern news lately in the Christian music realm, a lot of people have done what they've called deconstructed. They've taken apart their faith. There was a little chink where something didn't make sense. It was possibly something that they had made up themselves, and they were teaching others through their songs. And when they realized that didn't make sense, they kept following it back further and further and realizing how much gobbledygook they'd been speaking to people, and that there was no theological basis, and the sand washed away from underneath them. And some of them are no longer Christians at all. Now, some of them have been taken under the wing of a good pastor, whether Catholic or Christian, who has led them back to the scriptures and started to lay a more sure foundation. But note that in this time, realizing this, some of those mega churches have said, right, this is a vehicle for theology. Let's start putting our own theology in songs and see what happens. And so some of them out there have and I'm going to get wrong which one it is, but not every Christian would sing it. They're a little bit of off the beaten track, even of most Christians, but their music was very catchy. And so now their music has been banned by most Christian churches to be sung. And as well, there was quite a scandal when Matt Maher was found out to be Catholic. His songs are so over the top Catholic, though. He has so much theology. In fact, he has a song that is basically tantum ergo English translation, like the tune, everything. It's there, and people just weren't paying attention because they don't know Catholic theology. So non-Catholics were quite shocked to find out how Catholic he is. He sings about the Eucharist, friends. He sings about the real presence. It should not have been a shock, but it was to them because it was so foreign to their experience. This is a problem that happens in all ages. It is not a new problem. I recently got a book. I don't think I showed it to you. I don't think that I've done a review on it yet. This is by Father Faber. He is the one who authored Faith of Our Fathers. Again, that's a book that most Christians know across the board. I want to tell you here in his preface to his Jesus and Mary hymn book, this is a classic reprint. It says, the following hymns do not, as will be seen, form anything like the perfect collection, but are given as a specimen of a much larger and more complete work. The author has had a double end in view with the composition of them. First, to furnish some simple and original hymns for singing in Catholic churches. Secondly, to provide English Catholics with a hymn book for reading in the simplest and least involved meters. And both these objects have not unfrequently required considerable sacrifice in a literary point of view. When God raised up our dear and blessed Father St. Philip, St. Ignatius, and St. Teresa, and gave them to his church, just as the heresy of Protestantism was beginning to devastate the world, those three saints seemed to have distinct departments assigned to them. All of them in a different way met the subjectivity, self-introverted habit of mind, which was then coming uppermost, and thus rendered modern Catholicism the great object of our study and the model of our imitation, as being peculiarly fashioned, and that by the hands of the saints for the warfare of these later ages. St. Teresa represents common sense, the discreet enthusiasm of devotion in the interior life, which distinguishes Catholic asceticism and mysticism of the saints from the fanatical vagaries of the heretics. St. Ignatius, without debarring his children from any field of labor, took in a special way the education of Europe and the evangelization of distant lands for his department, and represented in the Church the principle of faith. St. Philip devised a changeful variety of spiritual exercises and recreations, which gathered round him the art and literature as well as the piety of Rome, and was eminently qualified to meet the increased appetite for the Word of God, for services in the vernacular, for hymn singing and prayer meetings. Sanctity in the world, perfection at home, high attainments in common earthly callings, such was the principal end of his apostolate. He met the gloom and sourness and ungainly stiffness of the Puritan element of Protestantism by cheerfulness and playful manners, which he ensured not in any human way, but by leaving to his children the frequentation of the sacrament as the chief subject of their preaching and their chief counsel and spiritual direction of others. And he represented in the church the principle of love. And he went on, there's quite a bit of praise of him. But then I will say what happened for this English son of St. Philip. He wanted a bunch of English Catholic hymns fit for singing. You know, when you translate something from another language, it doesn't always fit. And that's why, like Tantum Ergo, there's like 10 different English translations that are more or less accurate, more or less fit the meter of various tunes, blah, blah, blah. I know you're probably wondering where this is going. We needed easy hymns that were theologically sound and made sense in English. And Father Faber took this on. A couple of these are translations, but you'll notice that most of these are done out in poetic form. And why is that? If you see, I've written numbers up here. This is the meter. Did you study meter back in school where you had to count the number of syllables in each line? So this one is 8686. And then I can grab, it was just here. We've had another avalanche of books. I don't want to ruin that for you. Just a second, I have it right here. If you have friends, your Brebeuf hymnal, ta-da, you can look up in here. There should be hymns by meter. Indexes are what, in the middle? That's the only tricky part, is to remember where all the indexes are. Yes, first it's hymn tunes, English titles, alphabetical, hymn tunes, alphabetical, hymn tunes, metrical. So we had 8686. Aha! And here I am. There are a number of tunes that fit 8686. See, it's written out right there. It even goes up to the top of the next page. So you can look up meters, hymn tunes by meters, and then you'll have a number of hymns that you can look up in here. So that's one of the great strengths of the Brebeuf hymnal. Combine that with your Jesus and Mary hymnal. I know. You're like, what is she going on about? Songs of your history and theology of your people are so important. Those are the things that you are going to remember, like your rote prayers, in times of great trial. So this book has one on the Most Holy Trinity, the Eternal Father, Jesus, my God and my all, the Eternal Spirit, the infant Jesus, Jesus crucified, the precious blood, the descent of Jesus to Limbus, Jesus risen, the apparition of Jesus to our Blessed Lady, which is in the Franciscan Crown Rosary, the Ascension, the Corpus Christi, the mission of the Holy Ghost, the descent of the Holy Ghost, to our Blessed Lady, the Immaculate Conception, the Dolors of Our Lady, the month of May, the Assumption. You can see these are kind of listed by topic, but also by time of year. To our Blessed Lady for the souls in purgatory. Hail, Holy Joseph, the patronage of St. Joseph, creation of the angels. To my guardian angels for the school children. St. Peter and St. Paul, St. Philip Neri, St. Wilfrid. Flowers for the altar for school children. Faith of our fathers, conversion, the will of God, the world, distractions in prayer even, sweetness in prayer, dryness in prayer, pain of love, end of men, the gifts of God, the right must win, true love, perfection, predestination, in St. Philip's home. And when I say these are great for meditation and adoration and for learning, some of them have, like this one here, the apparition of Jesus to Mary, is 17 verses. There's a lot here. There's a lot in here, and I encourage you, just as it was helpful for The Hobbit, it is helpful for our time. We have those ancient songs. We have those ancient songs that we continue to sing. Some are very ancient hymns, and again, why I love singing them in the Latin is because it's an older language. It's not translated. And so we're all singing the same words. It's why I love to pray the St. Francis's prayer before the St. Damiano crucifix in Latin, because it is a language we have in common. And that is something that is helpful here. Losing your roots, losing that one common language, that's a great sadness. It is something that can unite us. So here they are. They came upon them. I picked up a Franciscan book and not her little hobbit. It is something that is quite beautiful. And so they're singing the old song about the Dwarven kings, singing about the return of the king. In The Lord of the Rings, it's about Aragorn being the return. And he is much more Christ-like seeing. The dwarves don't quite get it right, do they? Aragorn, though, it says he's not only marked with great courage and martial prowess, but with meekness and humility, and ultimately with a miraculous and Christ-like healing power that will shadow that he shows in the paths of the dead in the houses of healing. Thorin, by comparison, is grumpy, obstreperous, and falls into destructive dragon sickness. And that's like us. We're trying to be like little mini Christ, and we make mistakes and we fall and we stumble, right? We are not Christ. We try to be like him, certainly fall short, and yet we will pray again that will be raised. The book then talks about different models and inspirations for kings, such as Charlemagne, King Arthur. He talks about the Jacobite kings. And then he talks about Smaug. Smaug is a king in his own right, even being a dragon. He has no legitimate right to the riches of the true king's realm, but he has seized it by force, and that they are waiting then for the restoration of justice. Our author here, Joseph Pearce, will remind us again that the kingship itself is only legitimate insofar as it holds its authority from God. All true kings are only true insofar as they reflect the true kingship of Christ. And the return of the king signifies the second coming, when the long defeat of history will be vanquished by the final victory of Christ. This is the ultimate return from exile of the true king to claim his own. I'll tell you, this book then goes on to discuss St. Edward the Confessor and Macbeth, who may also talking about that true kingship if you want some more examples. Thorin, though, he does have legitimacy on his side. He is indeed the true king. He is not returning to save his people, however, but to recover his treasure, which sadly is not his people. We are reminded here of the Bible verse that says, where your heart is, there also your treasure will be. His treasure is literally treasure. It's gold and silver. It's not treasure of being part of the people of God and returning to God in the end, beholding the face of Christ. That's not what he's looking for. Aragorn is exalted in his humility, but Thorin will be humbled in his very pride. And so they both have a sense of humility, but where does it come from? One is humiliated and one is humble. And that is something just to take and look at for a couple of days. Why are you doing? Remember, we talked in the very beginning of this episode about how difficult it can be to put your penitential practices in with your daily life and chores. I mean, it's great to be a penitent. You're still going to have to wash clothes and cook food and things. So how does this look like? How can we have penance integrated within? Remember, we're called to serve. The king is called to serve, and we want humility, not being humbled. They are just things that every person has to work out for themselves. And here I'll go to a little poem about St. Francis of Assisi. It's in the Life of St. Francis by Thomas of Celano. We're in the first book. And every now and then it's versified. It's like a story and then it's in verse. And so here we'll have the verse part for how St. Francis figured this out. It says, "For St. Francis clung to the bishop as a son does to his father, and an only child to its mother, safely resting and sleeping in the lap of his kindness. The bishop filled the role and did the work of a shepherd, but left the name of the shepherd to the holy man. Blessed Francis would foresee needs, but that blessed Lord would deliver what was foreseen. There were many who plotted to destroy the new planting of the order at its beginning. There were many trying to suffocate the chosen vineyard, which the Lord's hand had so kindly planted anew in the world. There were many trying to steal and eat its first fresh fruit. But all of these opponents were slain with the sword of the venerable Father and the Lord, and their efforts came to naught. For he was a river of eloquence, a wall of the church, a spokesman for truth, and a lover of the humble." And if we keep our humility, we should be able to work these practices in. If we get prideful, like in the Bible, the one who goes in and makes sure everyone sees he has that giant cross and ashes. Everybody knows he's in sackcloth and ashes. He's penitent. He becomes very prideful. He will be humbled. But if we humbly try and weave in our practices, and we hear again, we've talked before here about St. Francis, if he was invited to a banquet, he'd try and get out of it. If he couldn't get out of a banquet, he would eat that first forkful of the feast, and then he would politely put his food into his napkin on his lap. So he was trying to appear gracious, but keeping his penance. How do we do that? I'm not suggesting you throw away all your precious food that your family has worked so hard to get. I'm not saying that, but you're going to have to figure out what that looks like for you. And that is a beautiful thing to do in this time of Lent. Okay, we're doing these penances. We love these hardcore penances, but what do they look like in our daily life? And how can we make sure that we're doing them humbly and not prideful? It's challenging. It is. Okay, here we are in chapter 8. And why this is important, because here it says, above all shadows rides the sun. That's the title of it, whatever. It's basically hope versus sin. And that dragon sickness spreads. If you spend your time with prideful people collecting things, you are going to probably catch that sickness and start doing the same thing yourself. And that can also be something that you watch on social media. It can be something you see on TV. It can be a club you're in. It can take many forms in our lives. But make sure that what you're doing is helping you with your relationship with God more than your relationship with the world. Let's see here. Here we see the master of Laketown. He was serving as a prophetic prelude to this emergent theme. He was also afflicted with the dragon's sickness and was blind to its causes. He did not believe in the legends and had little time for folklore and tradition. And again, I'm going to tell you again, those hymns and songs, capital T tradition, people make fun of them, but it is the apostolic tradition. It is the way the apostles lived that was handed down, the church from all the ages, giving us their wisdom. And there is value in it. You can be bored when you go to the Mass until you find out why we do the things we do, and then enter into them more deeply. Again, find out why we do the things we do. Don't just blindly have habits, but stop and examine. Why do you do the things you do? It's a great way to look into your humility. And again, weaving those practices in. Here we have the Hobbit and the whole company sitting on the lonely mountain. They're frustrated. They're despairing. They cannot see a way in to the treasure that they believe lies within. They cannot see any way. But Bilbo sits down on the doorstep, staring at a stone, which sat immovably where the door should be, or he would gaze off into the distant west. He had a feeling that he was waiting for something, a hope, but he didn't know what. But he had some faith and hope. And just as that new moon, the sun was setting and the new moon came up, and he heard that crack behind them, and he saw that thrush knocking a snail on the stone. And he realized that was the keyhole. So he had to trust and have patience and the wisdom of that tradition that told him what was going to happen. And we know that they get in there. So there they are. Right. It talks a bit on about that scene on the lowly mountain, the rays of the setting sun serving as the finger of God, touching a seemingly desperate moment with the providential promise of hope's fulfillment. Michelangelo, right? God and man reaching out to each other. Is this simply a coincidence? Is it poetic wishful thinking or mere superstition? But we know that the sun is not merely the sun any more than the shadow is merely a shadow, but the sun is symbolic of the presence of a light that the darkness cannot penetrate. And here is why another reason why I had our Franciscan books out. I have Saint Clare Beyond the Legend. And this one up here does talk about a light. These are the witnesses after Clare's death. So this is the witness of Philippa. Who is Philippa? She's a sister. Sister Philippa. Okay. She tells us about, on page 101 and 102, a miracle that happened to St. Clare. So this is something that happened after St. Francis's death. So Clare did not speak to her sisters about her relationship with Christ, but her relationship with Francis. However, if you look closely, the matter is not as strange as it seems at first. In all probability, this vision took place after the death of Francis, given that Sister Amata, who also mentions it in her evidence, did not enter until, she didn't enter into the Poor Clares until after 1228 or 1229. In that case, it is a period of great uncertainty for the community at San Damiano. As we can have seen, the loss of Francis was followed by considerable pressure being applied to Clare to renounce some of those elements of her religious experience which she considered fundamental, namely poverty and her link with the friars. They were always issues of contention. Obviously, in these circumstances, Clare and her sisters would have looked back to the one who had been their strong support even though the Blessed Father was now dead. This vision appears as a consolation, a divine response to this need. In the details of everyday life, such as a towel or basin of water, Clare could see that everydayness, that there was a path upwards through the weariness of life at San Damiano. There at the summit, Francis awaited her, and the ascent seemed to her very easy. When she reached Francis, he gave her his own milk to drink. The fact that the saint was presented in a feminine body did not pose any problem to Clare or to the other sisters. It is obvious that what is being expressed here is the spiritual maternity of Francis, who gives Clare something to drink and nourishes her, and thereby recognizes her as a daughter. For this was an experience of happiness. It was so sweet and delightful that there was no way she could explain it. Then, however, the dream had an unexpected development, for after she had drunk, what she had tasted was so sweet and delightful she in no way could describe it. And after she had imbibed, that nipple or opening of the breast from which the milk comes remained between the lips of the Blessed Clare. In other words, a part of the body of Francis, a part of Francis himself, remained with Clare. And finally, after she took what remained in her mouth into her hands, it seemed to her as if it was gold, so clear and bright that everything was seen in it as a mirror. Clare had not only interiorized a part of Francis, but she herself had been transformed. Her image and stature were that equal of Francis's. She herself, through her dream, had been transformed into a mirror of Francis, into another Francis. This, then, is the concrete significance which the vision must have had for the sisters of San Damiano. Confronted by any questions about who was their support after the death of Francis, the dream responds that it was Clare herself who had now been transformed into another Francis, and that she would now be all the support they might need. This, too, is the reason why the sisters tell about the vision during the canonization process, that Son is more than the Son. It reflects Clare is more than St. Clare. She's a perfect image of Francis. And Francis, who was so like Christ that he ended up bearing the stigmata in his own flesh. So she is being shown as a sign. This is the way, you are on the right path. And that is a beautiful, the sun is a symbolic of the presence of a light that the darkness cannot penetrate. And here as we go, this chapter ends pondering the sun. As we ponder the importance of the sun as a symbol of the presence of divine light and life in the world, we might see its absence as symbolic of the shadow of evil and also of the dragon sickness, which is its consequence. Those who refuse to see the glimpses of providence and ignore the glam of evangelium are condemning themselves to a world of shadow in which the light is eclipsed by the darkness of sin. And then it says, it is time to meet the dragon, which will be our next chapter. But I do want to end there. We know there are so many people who do not acknowledge Christ as the light and light of their life and the life of the world. And yet we hear many of these people, atheists and all different kinds of odd things, who will still use those common expressions that are outright blasphemy. But when they are in a moment of great excitement, whether really good or really bad, they will still cry out to God. It is instinctive. It is in our nature to cry out. And so, friends, I want to invite you one thing. When you hear that, stop and give praise to God. First of all, for that great thing that caused that person to exclaim that normally, but also invite God into that moment. Ask God to truly show that person who's experiencing his love right in that moment to really, that they will be able to recognize him, and use that as a moment of evangelization, even if it is done interiorly through your prayer. So somebody says that like a car almost hits them, but it rights itself on the highway. You know, one of those near accidents, and the person cries out, "Oh my God." And you say, "May his name be praised for saving us from this terrible tragedy. I give God all the thanks in the world for sparing us from certain death, from sparing our families that, for giving us another moment in which we may turn to him." And friends, in this moment, let us beg God that indeed our friend may turn to God as we ourselves turn evermore to him. There is still time. He has given us time. He's given us another chance. And we're going to pray that the light of God really shine in that person, that they be able to see him, and that they convert their hearts to him. I'm going to leave you with that. And part of that, friends, is our humble example. If we are doing all the things we do in Lent out of pride, people will see that and they'll be turned off by it. If they see that we're doing it out of humility, then they may see something worthwhile in it and give you an opportunity to speak of that light which is in your life. Okay, friends, I'm going to let you go. We're right at a half an hour. I know this was late. Again, I apologize. I will try to be better. Please pray for me. I'm praying for you. God bless you. Bye.